The city skyline shimmered in the distance, blurred by streaks of rain sliding down the glass walls of the rooftop lounge. Outside, the storm howled like a restless animal, wind tearing at umbrellas and bending street lamps below. Inside, the warm amber glow of dimmed chandeliers painted the leather armchairs in soft gold, but the air still carried the quiet chill of isolation. Adrian Kane sat alone in a corner booth, a man carved from precision and control. At 35, he was a name that made boardrooms fall silent, a figure whispered about in expensive suits and hushed tones, the millionaire CEO who never smiled unless there was profit in it. Tonight, however, there was no business. Only a glass of Macallan whiskey resting in his hand, the ice shifting with a muted clink each time he rolled it absently between his fingers. He wasn't really looking at the rain. He was watching his own reflection in the window, sharp jawline, tired eyes, the faint shadow of a man who had built an empire but lost the reason for building it somewhere along the way. The lounge was nearly empty, save for a waiter polishing glasses at the far end and a couple murmuring over wine near the fireplace. Then came the sound, a sharp, staccato rhythm of heels on marble, echoing across the floor like an urgent heartbeat. He didn't look up at first. Women walked past him every day, all of them painted with confidence or calculated charm. But this sound stopped halfway, as if the owner of those footsteps had frozen mid-breath. Adrian glanced up, and froze too. A small figure stood by the entrance, rain dripping from the ends of her hair, her coat clutched tightly around her trembling frame. She didn't belong here, not in this world of tailored suits and vintage wine. Her gaze swept the room nervously before landing on him, and in that instant, something flickered across her face, fear, determination, maybe both. She moved toward him, each step hesitant yet pulled forward by some invisible force. When she reached his table, her voice came out soft, almost swallowed by the storm outside. Can you be my daddy for one night? The words cut through the air like the crack of lightning behind her. Adrian's grip on his glass stilled. His first instinct was suspicion. Was this some drunken flirtation, some bizarre pickup line? But then her tone registered. There was no seduction in it. Only desperation. The dim light caught her features as she pushed wet strands from her face, and his breath hitched without his permission. He knew that face, or at least, he thought he did. Somewhere deep in the recesses of his memory, it was tied to another life, another time. Her lips were trembling, but not from the cold. Adrian could tell she was fighting to keep her voice steady, as though each word cost her something. You don't understand, she said quickly, as if she feared he might cut her off and send her away. It's for my little girl. She's sick, and the hospital, she swallowed hard, the hospital won't put her on the schedule without a guarantee. Adrian said nothing. He had learned the value of silence in business, it made people reveal more than they intended. And she did. Her eyes darted away from him, fixed somewhere on the table as she continued. I've sold everything I could. The car, my jewelry. I even borrowed from friends who don't really have anything to give. But it's still not enough. The rain outside beat harder against the glass, the sound pressing in on the space between them. Adrian's gaze sharpened. She was young, mid-20s, maybe. Too young to look this worn down, too young to carry the weight of a life falling apart. It was then, in the shift of her hair, the angle of her jaw, that the recognition hit him like a blow. He'd seen that face before, not in person, but in a photograph his late brother kept hidden in a drawer. The photograph his family had scoffed at, the one they'd told Adrian to forget. A girl his brother had loved, though she'd never been good enough for the Kane name. Adrian's hand tightened slightly around his glass. Could it be her? She mistook his silence for judgment and hurried on. I wouldn't be here if I had any other choice. But you look like, she hesitated, her eyes flicking over him. You look like the kind of man who can make things happen, if he wanted to. It wasn't a compliment. If anything, it was an accusation. Adrian leaned back in his chair, keeping his face unreadable. And what exactly would I be making happen? She bit her lip before answering, as though bracing for him to laugh at her. Just pretend. Pretend you're her father. Sign some papers, show up with me tomorrow so they'll approve the plan. One night. Then you'll never have to see me again. Her voice cracked at the last word. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the sheen of tears in her eyes. For a long moment, Adrian studied her. Her coat was soaked, her hair dripping onto the polished wood of the table. Yet she sat with her spine straight, holding herself together like someone who'd had to rebuild her dignity 100 times already. And though she didn't know it, every instinct in him, every carefully constructed wall, was beginning to shift. He gestured toward the empty chair opposite him. Sit, he said, his tone carrying the kind of authority that didn't invite refusal. She hesitated for a second, her eyes flicking toward the exit, as if considering whether to bolt. But something in his voice, perhaps the faint thread of possibility, held her in place. She lowered herself into the chair, keeping her damp coat wrapped tight around her, as though afraid that if she let go, everything holding her together would spill onto the table. Adrian didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch, observing her the way he would a potential business rival, watching how she breathed, how her hands clenched, how she avoided his gaze when she spoke. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Lena," she replied, her voice small but steady. "Lena," he rolled the name over in his mind, wondering if he'd heard it before in his brother's conversations, in the whispers his family had buried. "Tell me about your daughter." Something in her face softened, as if the mere mention of the child pulled her into a different place. "Her name's Ivy. She's 6. She loves drawing, mostly animals, though she makes up her own too. The doctors say she's strong for her age, but she needs the surgery soon." Adrian caught the way Lena's voice cracked at the word, soon. It wasn't just urgency, it was fear. Real, bone-deep fear. "And where's her father?" he asked. Her jaw tightened, and her gaze snapped up to meet his for the first time. "Gone," she said flatly. "He died before she was born." The answer hit him like a blade twisting under his ribs. His mind flashed to his brother's funeral, quiet, restrained, buried under the Kane family's polished grief. Could Ivy be? He didn't let his expression change. Years of boardroom negotiations had trained him to mask even the sharpest emotions. "And this arrangement you're asking for," he said, "you think I'll just walk into a hospital and pretend to be a father to a child I've never met?" "Yes." Her answer came quick, almost defiant. "Because I've run out of people to ask. And you look like someone who doesn't lose." That last sentence landed heavier than she could have known. Adrian Kane didn't lose, ever. And now, here was a woman who might be carrying the one battle he couldn't walk away from without consequence. He studied her for a long moment, the edges of a truth starting to form in his mind, one that could unravel both of their lives. The waiter passed by quietly, placing a fresh glass of water in front of Lena. She murmured a thank you without looking up, her fingers curling around the glass as though the coolness might ground her. Adrian watched her for a moment, noticing the fine tremor in her hands. It wasn't weakness, it was the toll of too many battles fought alone. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" His voice was low, deliberate. She drew in a shaky breath. "The hospital has a policy. They want assurance, financial and parental. They want to know there's someone responsible to cover Ivy's care and make decisions. I can't give them what they want alone. I just need you to come with me, sign the consent, and stand there like you belong." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his mind parsing every word. This wasn't a con. Her desperation was too raw, too unpolished for that. But it was also a request that would tie him, publicly, legally, to a situation he didn't yet understand. "And why me?" he asked, still testing her. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a second, he felt the weight of them. "Because you have that look." "What look?" "The look of a man who could walk into any room and make people listen," she said simply. "The kind of man they'd never question." Her words stirred something in him, not pride, but an awareness of how power worked outside the boardroom. He had spent years mastering influence, bending circumstances to his will. Now here was someone asking him to use it for something entirely different. He took a slow sip of whiskey, his mind turning back to the face of his brother. The possibility was becoming harder to ignore. If Ivy was his niece, then this wasn't just charity. It was blood. "And after that?" he asked. "After that, you walk away. You'll never have to see me or Ivy again." The ease with which she offered to vanish scraped against something in his chest. If she was connected to his brother, then disappearing would be the last thing he'd allow. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "One night might not be enough," he said slowly. Confusion flickered in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "It means," he said, his tone firm but quiet, "if I do this, I'm not going to disappear when the clock runs out. You're asking me to step into your life. I don't step into anything halfway." Her breath caught, and for the first time since she walked in, something like unease crossed her face, not fear of him, but fear of what that might mean for her carefully guarded walls. The storm outside had begun to soften, but inside the lounge, the air between them had thickened into something neither of them could easily walk away from. Adrian's decision came with the same quiet finality he used to close multi-million-dollar deals. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black card, and placed it on the table between them. Call the hospital, he said. Tell them we're coming tonight. I'll cover the deposit. Lena blinked at him, her lips parting as though she hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. Tonight. Yes. His tone left no space for negotiation. If Ivy needs the surgery, we don't wait until morning. I assume you have a way to get there. She hesitated, and in that pause, he read the truth, she didn't. Adrian rose from his chair, sliding the card back into his pocket. We'll take my car. For a moment, she didn't move, almost as if her body couldn't process the shift from pleading to action. Then she gathered herself and stood, her wet coat dripping onto the polished floor. The elevator ride down from the rooftop lounge was silent except for the low hum of machinery. Adrian stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the mirrored wall. In the reflection, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her as though holding herself together was a physical effort. When the elevator doors opened, the smell of rain and asphalt swept in. His driver was already waiting by the curb, the black Bentley purring quietly in the downpour. Adrian held the door for her without a word, watching as she slid into the leather seat, careful not to drip too much water inside. As they pulled away from the curb, the city lights smeared into streaks against the wet windows. You said Ivy's 6, Adrian said suddenly. Yes. He did the math in his head. 6 years ago, his brother was still alive. Still in touch with the woman in the photograph. What's her birthday? He asked. Lena turned to look at him, her brow furrowing slightly. April 14th. Why? He didn't answer. But the date confirmed what his gut had been whispering since the moment he saw her face. It lined up almost perfectly with the time his brother had disappeared from the family radar for several months. She's got your eyes, you know, Lena said quietly, surprising him. Sharp. Like she's always figuring out how the world works before it tells her. The comment hit harder than she could have known. He didn't respond, just let the silence stretch as the Bentley sliced through the wet streets toward the hospital. Somewhere deep down, he already knew, if he walked through those hospital doors tonight, nothing about his life would remain untouched. The hospital's automatic doors slid open with a faint hiss, releasing a rush of sterile air tinged with disinfectant. The fluorescent lights inside were too bright after the muted glow of the lounge, and Lena squinted against them as they stepped into the lobby. Adrian followed at her side, his presence drawing the kind of quiet attention reserved for men who looked like they didn't belong in places where people waited for bad news. Lena led the way to the reception desk, her voice low but firm as she gave Ivy's name and explained that her father had arrived. Adrian didn't miss the faint hesitation she placed around that word. The receptionist glanced up, eyes briefly widening at him before turning back to her screen. A few keystrokes later, she gestured for them to follow a nurse down the hall. They passed rooms with half-closed curtains, the muffled beeps of monitors and the occasional cough or sigh breaking the heavy stillness. Adrian kept his gaze forward, but his mind was elsewhere, on the date Lena had given him, on the photograph in his brother's desk, on the gnawing sense that every step was taking him deeper into a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. When they reached Ivy's room, Lena paused at the door, taking a breath before pushing it open. The little girl was sitting up in bed, a sketchpad balanced on her knees. Her hair was a dark, silky wave that framed a face far too pale for her age. She looked up, and her eyes, clear, intelligent, and startlingly sharp, locked on Adrian. For a second, he forgot how to breathe. Those eyes. His mother's eyes. His brother's eyes. Lena's voice softened. Ivy, honey, this is. She stopped herself, just for a fraction of a second, then smiled. This is someone who's going to help us. Ivy studied him for a moment longer, then set her sketchpad aside and reached for the cup of water on her table. You look like the man in the picture Mommy keeps in her drawer, she said matter-of-factly, as if she were talking about the weather. Lena stiffened, her fingers tightening on the bed rail. Ivy, what picture? Adrian asked quietly, his voice careful, deliberate. The little girl shrugged. The one with Mommy and a man in a suit. But he's younger in the picture. He's smiling. The air in the room shifted, heavy with something unspoken. Lena's face had gone pale, and Adrian knew she was silently calculating whether to explain or deflect. But he didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he walked closer, stopping beside the bed. What are you drawing? Ivy's expression brightened a little as she picked up the sketchpad again. She turned it toward him, revealing a drawing of a fox, its fur done in intricate strokes of orange and red. The detail was startling for a child her age. It's beautiful, Adrian said, and meant it. Ivy smiled faintly. Mom says foxes are smart because they know how to survive. Adrian glanced at Lena, catching the way her gaze softened at her daughter's words. And in that moment, he knew, whether or not the truth was spoken tonight, he was already tied to them. By blood or by choice, they were his to protect now.